Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Scottish Liberty podcast with me, Antony Sammeroff,
Tom Laird.
and today we've got a special guest, my friend Townsley.
Hi.
He is going to school us on why we shouldn't be for Brexit, and he's going to teach us why we should change to be Remain voters. So I guess before we get started, and I was just wondering, what is the criteria for you changing your opinion on this conversation? What would have to be true for you to favour Brexit?
Good question. Some data would be nice for a start. I mean, I don't know if anybody's followed the debate in general, but it's almost all personality over substance in any of the media. Finding any hard fact has been nearly impossible for me. Some kind of promises about what would actually happen if we left as well, like any vague idea of what the plan is, that would help. Things like that, essentially. Yeah, basically anything vaguely concrete on the subject.
Something kind of practical.
Yeah, basically. I mean, all I've heard is high-minded rhetoric about it the entire time. That's all the debate is. Also, people like Boris Johnson saying Hitler would have voted to stay, which, I mean, who cares? Captain Birdseye might have voted to stay as well. I don't give a shit.
Right, okay. And I guess the first question I had was, not long ago, we were in the pub discussing the Scottish independence referendum, and you were telling me, wouldn't it be so much better if the government was local and whatever kind of political stroke you were from? So for me, I'm just trying to understand why that's different, why you were so for...
That's a valid question, why I was a yes voter but still pro-remaining in the EU. I know on paper that sounds like it makes no sense, obviously.
I would say it seems to make no sense to me, but...
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. It's a question I get asked a lot, to be honest. Incidentally, as a side note, my stance on independence hasn't changed. If there is ever another referendum, I'm still going to be quite heavily in the yes camp to leaving the UK. I think it comes down to two things. One, the UK government in its structure, in its culture, in the way it's elected, the way it's controlled, and most importantly, the way the populace think about it, which is something that's much harder to change, has been and continues to be an inherently destructive institution. Whereas Europe is, I'll outright admit, I think this, Europe's kind of terrible. It's not a great thing, but it's also a bit more mutable, a bit more culturally changeable. It has less control over things than the UK government itself does. The reason I was pro-yes is because, well, yeah, I wanted government to be on a smaller scale, to be able to have a bit more say over what was happening to me, for it to be a bit more direct to people. I know the EU seems like the opposite of that, but the EU isn't a government in the same way that the UK government is, if you know what I mean.
I don't know what you mean. In what way is it not a government? Don't 50% of our laws come from the EU now?
That's a contestable statistic. It depends on which sphere you're talking about, which laws you mean. A chunk of our laws do come from the EU, admittedly, but they're not like laws that are set in stone the same way a constitutional law would be. They're laws that the Parliament could decide not to follow. Comes with massive trade problems and massive economic problems for the government decides not to do it, but the EU doesn't have jurisdiction that kind of way.
Well, what I've noticed that's really pissed me off a number of times is you'll be watching Question Time or something like that, and a politician or an audience member will say, why don't we just pass this law or that law? And someone on the panel will be like, well, we couldn't do that because that would fly in the face of EU regulations. And I'm like, why have we lost the ability to make our own laws? You know, why can't we pass a law because it would fly in the face of EU regulations? And if that is the case, why don't we just accept the EU as our government and devolve completely to the EU? Because if their laws take precedence over our laws, they're de facto our government.
It's devolving to a larger power that way, not kind of how World War I started.
Well, I'm not saying that I'd be in favour of it. What I'm saying is, why have we lost the ability to write our own laws?
It depends which laws you're talking about. Largely, at least from my observation of it, I'm not going to say this is absolute fact, but it's largely because in a globalized world, a lot more intercommunication has to go on between different foreign countries. Whereas once upon a time you could be self-sufficient, these days the UK is not and will not be self-sufficient in the modern world. It's not possible. So the EU does gain a bit of control that way. It does write certain laws. They're usually about labour rights and stuff like that. They're not laws I particularly dislike, to be honest, which obviously gives me a slightly different opinion of it. But yeah, it controls things on that kind of sphere, admittedly. But there's a lot of laws, say like drug legalization, things like that, a lot of social policies, whether you want gay marriage or not, EU has nothing to do with. It couldn't care less. Hence how both Turkey and Holland can be members.
Do you want to?
Well, first of all, I'd probably agree from the get-go that the standard of debate so far in the public sphere has been pretty grim, and it's not. It seems to be a never-ending succession of economic theory and scare stories, and it's not been an entirely grown-up debate. What I'm interested in is, I mean, obviously, like yourself, I was a yes voter. Now the reason, the question, if you can cast your mind back, the question that was asked during that election was, and correct me if I'm wrong, the question was, do you think Scotland should be, do you think Scotland should be an independent country?
Yeah.
My answer to that was yes. Taking it your answer to that was yes.
Yeah, that was.
And yet, there is no such thing within the European Union as a sovereign independent nation. You cede sovereignty away in order to gain, or what you think you might gain from being part of a greater economic union. So I suppose it's a valid position to think that that's a good idea, but I don't know how you could possibly get away with dressing it up as independence and calling it independence. Why do they do that? Why did the SNP do that, do you think?
It's a valid question as well. To be honest, I always saw it as independence from the UK, not independence from the entire world, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
I mean, an independent Scotland would also, I suppose, have the opportunity to, for lack of a better term, because this is the way it was put all of the time and is, be Norway. Incidentally, as a side note, I'm just going to say this to the entire world, please, in any kind of debate about a country, stop just going, can we please be Norway? Norway's nice, just stop demanding to be Norway.
I think the Scottish National,
personally.
Well, I think the Scottish National Party decided to stop using the Norwegian model a long time ago because it really didn't fit with what it wanted to do. And I think more recently they've started to. Certainly the Scottish National Party have started to use Sweden as their model.
That's fair.
On the Leave side, you're probably right. They have used Norway a couple of times, but most people I think now are using the Swiss model. But I think probably in both instances, I think you're right. Why bother with these comparisons when it's just a matter of a straight matter of, do you think Scotland can do it on its own, or do you think it needs to be part of a greater union? Just because. There is no reason that just because Norway could do it and just because Switzerland can do it, we can do it as well. But I also think there's no reason why we can't do it.
Oh no, totally. My major point with that one was it was an irrelevant thing to bring up.
Yeah.
It wasn't the question. The question wasn't, can we be Norway? The question was, should we be independent?
Yeah.
Which, as I said before, I was very, very for.
Okay.
I think from the whole why is one union better than the other thing, it depends which union you're talking about, really.
Right. Okay.
I view the EU as a slightly less terrible institution than the UK.
But okay, just exploring that for a moment. I mean, we have our own parliament here in Scotland, for better, for worse. It makes laws, or rather, it tries to. The SNP, for example, decided that they were going to put a minimum price on alcohol. Now they're the elected government, whether I like them or not.
That's true.
They were put in power. They decided to make that a law. I disagree with it. The EU overturned it and said it was illegal under their regulations. And you go, well, what's the point? What's the point of electing our own government to make laws And then, no, don't get me wrong, I'm glad the EU overturned it.
That's
I thought it was a stupid idea.
Oh, it was a terrible idea.
Yeah.
I don't know, 8% of the SNP's ideas seem to be anyway.
Yeah. Well,
I-
good we can agree on that at least.
Yeah, at least
What if we're doing the debate about the whole, what is it called again, legal guardian thing?
Not
I think
named
person.
person. Yeah.
named person, we're just going to end up loudly agreeing for an hour.
Yeah.
Because that's awful on all levels.
Well, we can come back to that on another show, and maybe we can have you on for that, right? What bothers me about the EU, well, I could say a lot of things, but largely what bothers me is it started out as the European Economic Community. It didn't have loads of powers, it had a little bit of power, and its policies from the get-go were an absolute environmental disaster. They agreed to just buy any farming produce, that whether people needed it or not, and as a consequence, like 90% of the hedgerows in this country were pulled up. We lost wetlands, we lost lowland heath, and this was happening all over Europe. They overproduced so much food that it, you know, there was these grain stacks, and then they said, I know, let's send it to the third world, dump the food in the third world, creating a glut, and then destroying their local economies. Right, that was just at the inception of this. In the inception of this. Since then, well, that's not really over, because there's still 60% of the EU budget goes to subsidising farmers and fisheries, and it's, first of all, we need to admit a lower standard of living because we can't import food easily from outside without putting tariffs on it, but it's terrible for the third world as well, because we should be buying our food from the poorest countries in the world and sending them our money in order to help their economies develop. Kind of straight from my original point, which is that this is an organisation that isn't going to stay at the same size and the same amount of power that it is now. It's going to get more powerful, it's going to become bigger, and 20, 30 years from now, we don't know. Right now, a lot of people support it in Scotland out of expediency. They're saying, well, it's acting as a bulwark against the Tories.
Yeah.
But as it continues to grow in power, we don't know who's going to be in charge of the EU 20 or 30 years from now. And I think it's very concerning to me as something that started out as the European Economic Community and has grown into a government that overrules the laws of member states. Where is this going? It's not going to be EU as it is just now in 30 years. And why do you trust such a big concentration of power as a sort of liberal-minded person?
Well, so, I mean, just to recap quickly, your essential fear is the eventual creation of, for lack of a better name, the United States of Europe.
I mean, a United States of Europe run on minarchistic principles, a minimal government for all of Europe, that would be preferable to me. But it's not the size of jurisdiction that bothers me.
Oh, it's the amount of power.
Concentration of power. Okay. And to sort of expand on that, do you know what the British Commissioner's name is? Did you vote for him? Do you know who the 5 presidents are?
I'm pretty sure our EMP is not EMP.
No, our
MEP.
commissioner. That's the point. We've got MEPs, we've got commissioners. There's 5 presidents. No one fucking understands this institution. It's. Did
That's kind of because
anyone
it conglomerated rather than was actually planned out.
Sorry. Anyway, I'll give you the chance to respond to my case because I'm interested in what you have to say.
I do. Look, I actually think that is a valid argument for the Leave camp that where is the EU going in the long run. My counterpoint would be that's a thing to consider 20 years from now. We don't know where it's going. It could equally collapse under its own weight. It could become more minarchistic as time goes on. In fact, there's a lot of arguments to say that's probably the way things would go, because trying to control an institution of that size is going to become near impossible. And Europe has a long history with empires that fell under their own weight. It's basically, Europe's bread and butter doing that. If we haven't collectively learned from that mistake by now, then okay, fair enough, we'll do Rome again. That could be fun. I suppose.
Rome
Totally in for the last days.
The collapse of Rome with iPads, basically.
Yeah, basically, yeah. The last days of Rome, but more digital. You know, instead of hookers on the streets, just everybody has Tinder, I don't know, something along those lines.
Can I ask something here, just actually of both of you? Because I mean, I'm slightly older than you guys, and I hear a lot. The thing that I continually hear is like there's this chasm between young people and older people tend to want to vote leave, and younger people tend to want to remain. What's your own experiences in terms of what are you hearing? What's the word on the street? Yeah, you know, with anybody that you meet, I mean, you meet a lot of people in the course of your work.
That's true, actually. Yeah. And so Brexit comes up a lot.
Okay,
to be honest.
And is it true that younger people tend to want to remain? If it's true, why is that? What's your general feeling that why they want to do it? Is it a perception that somehow the Leave campaign is this kind of stuffy, cravat wearing, blazer wearing bunch of major misunderstandings that don't like foreigners, or you know, what do you think?
I think there's certainly an element of that. I have noticed an age disparity. In fact, it's more older people on the side of Leave. I think one of the issues is there's a lot of people in the Leave camp for the wrong reasons. I mean, I'm assuming you two aren't for Leave because damn foreigners, how dare they do all the foreigner things? Or
no.
Words to that effect.
No.
Yeah, cool.
Not primarily, at least.
I mean, we've discussed Brexit a couple of times on our show, but we've not really talked about the immigration aspect of it. Maybe we can come back
because I think personally, I think it's a distraction. I don't really think it's the important point.
Neither do I.
There's a lot of people on the Leave side hammering that point, and I think it's off-putting
to be
to
honest,
those in the
it is
Remain.
one of the reasons I'm in the Remain camp is that the Leave camp seems really, really pro leaving the open borders zone. I could cope with leaving the EU provided we kept the open borders zone, but
well, okay. I mean, even within, right, you're talking, there's kind of two separate issues there. I mean, there's immigration in a general sense, then there's immigration from the EU. But I think what Farage and guys like him are talking about is, instead of the current system, still encouraging immigration, because it's an integral part of an economy.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, but
well, how else do you cover for labour shortages?
Well, yeah, but rather than doing it through the current system, we'd have a far greater choice of where we could bring immigrants in from. We could bring immigrants in from our former Commonwealth countries that we can't do at the moment, where there are people who also need work and need to need to get across borders. So I don't think that that's this idea that suddenly border fences will go up again and we'll start deporting people. I think that's a scare tactic. I think what Farage certainly is talking about is an Australian system based on like points, so that you can at least pick and choose.
Pro the New Zealand system of doing things rather than anything, but
I'm not familiar with that.
I like New Zealand in general, but please go on.
New Zealand system. Well, New Zealand is quite hard to be a citizen of, to be fair. But they basically yearly print a list of we need people that do these things, and then they get to go there.
Yeah,
it's quite a simple model. It's basically we want this kind of folk, kind of like a job interview, to be honest, just for citizenship. I'd like, if we could import people from the former Commonwealth countries, if that was the way I saw Brexit going, then I might be more in support of it. It's just from sort of the word on the street, from your sort of average Leave voter, it seems to be far more of an isolationist kind of principle, at least from what I hear from the people I've talked to. And an isolationist victory for Brexit is different from leaving it for different reasons. The problem I have with it is why people are voting, not what they're voting so much.
So
because the Parliament will listen to
are
why.
Just sort of discriminatory, are doing it
Xenophobia.
on xenophobic.
Basically, yeah. There's a big element of the Leave campaign which is based around xenophobia, which I'm not comfortable with.
Right. Well, what I would say is, for me, this has come up on a Facebook debate, and for me it's not that much of a concern, because supposing we vote out, these people who are a bit more xenophobic and that's why they voted Leave are still going to be around, but so are all the so are all the Remain voters still going to be around. It's not just because, the bigots happen to be on the side that, one, that suddenly the whole country en masse becomes bigoted and follows in their footsteps, there's still going to be the rest of the opinions in society sort of counterbalance that.
That is true. My worry is who gets listened to more than anything. Nobody's opinion is going to go away. People will still think things after it. I mean, hell, I'm still a yes voter even though Scotland didn't go independent. I'm still on the side of that. That's not going to change. But it comes down to the voice that's recognised as being the voice of the people, if you know what I mean. If the Remain camp wins based around xenophobia, the Leave camp wins based around xenophobia, then the powers that be will pay way more attention to xenophobia in the future. It goes down that kind of line. They'll listen to the loudest xenophobic voice rather than just the loudest voice in general, because from their experience of trying to get elected over and over again, apparently xenophobia is a winning tactic. It goes on that kind of way.
Okay, so you take it that if a Brexit vote came through, the government or whoever's incumbent would take that as a green light that people generally dislike immigration and we should reduce it, and they would take it as a green light to, I don't know, be nasty to immigrants in general.
I would think so, to be honest. Bear in mind, this is from my experience of talking to people in general. I don't think I've seen any official poll based on how racist are you. Somebody should do that. So the average level of racism. The racist mean.
What about a 0 to 10 or 0 to 5?
Yeah, basically strongly agree, strongly disagree.
Yeah, okay. Right.
What is the right amount of racism for a nation to have? You know,
yeah, what's a workable?
You know, because everything is of course, and this is what you get when you're a libertarian. People say, but isn't there just the right amount of government? And it's like, isn't there the right amount of arsenic in your tea? Do you know what I mean? Isn't there the right amount of? Oh, you're such an extremist. You believe in the non-aggression principle. It's like, oh yeah, you're such an extremist. Do you think the ideal number of rapes is 0? Like, surely there's a middle ground.
It reminds me of that quote from the previous Pope, we have to bring paedophilia in the Catholic Church to acceptable levels. I always loved that phrase, like, okay, what is your acceptable level? Because if it's not 0, then you're wrong.
Oh, that's so bad.
I know.
Let's talk about regulations, baby. Let's talk about
regulations.
You and me. Let's
EU
talk about
regulations.
some really, really bad tariffs and subsidies.
A lovely song.
Did you just knock that out off the top of your head there? Okay. Because we're clearly wasted doing this debate. We should spend just knocking out a rap song.
Right, really
Well, we could turn the rest of the debate into a rap battle if you want, but
Why would that involve us having to do it?
yeah, that's true.
So there's 109 EU laws governing pillows, but it's okay.
Pillows?
Yeah, only 5 governing pillowcases. So
That's a great fact.
yeah, 31 for toothbrush, 42 for toothpaste, 91 for showers, 118 regulations governing shampoo, 454 regarding towels, only 52 regarding toasters, but 1,246 regarding bread.
1,246? What are they?
I have no idea.
I kind of want to see examples of these laws. I mean, it's not...
625 regarding coffee, 12,653 regarding milk, and
that sounds right.
this is pretty bad. Like how's this? When did this get out of hand? Like, who thought this was a good idea? Is this not just jobs for the boys? Getting people to draft up these regulations. But what bothers me is not just that, it's the cost of compliance for small and medium businesses who can't afford the accountants and the lawyers to
deal with European trade.
And this is just basically a handoff to the big corporations.
Well, okay, for a start, even if we vote to leave, the EU isn't going anywhere. It will still have all those regulations, and the EU is our major trading partner. The UK economy cannot survive without the EU being around.
It's good for
actually,
us because
only
we won't have
something like
it's good for our manufacturing.
6% of UK businesses actually trade with the EU, but the rest of the businesses who don't really trade with the EU still have to comply with EU law, even though they're not trading with the EU.
That's true, but a huge number of the businesses in the UK don't trade in general. I mean, that's an almost meaningless statistic. If you're a restaurant, how much trading do you do with the EU?
Okay, I'm not sure, but I'm taking it that it's 6% of businesses that do trade with the EU.
Possibly, and admittedly they have. The other thing I would say about those regulations, incidentally, is a law is only good as people willing to obey it. You can come up with all the pointless laws you want. If nobody does it, then it doesn't really matter.
But the thing is, you could be in breach of a law at any point. You know, there was this...
I'm pretty sure I've broken like 3 laws today already.
That's true. Everyone's breaking laws without realising it, because there's so many damn laws. You know, there used to be this joke about in the Soviet Union, you know, I came with 3 people are in a prison, and one's like, well, I came to work early and I was accused of brown nosing. Someone comes late, I was accused of malingering. Well, I was right on time and I was accused of something else, and they're all in prison. And it's kind of like that with the antitrust laws. You know, one entrepreneur is in jail for putting his prices below market price and accused of predatory pricing. One's putting it above market price and accused of profiteering, and one's putting it at the market level exactly and accused of collusion with other corporations. Now the problem is...
I'd be highly surprised if there's an EU law against collusion. Is that not what the point is in the EU? It's basically like collusion the thing.
But the point is, they don't need to bring you up for breaking the law until they've got a reason to want to. So you could be breaking the law for years, and then the right person, the right competitor, bribes the right governor, and then they go, yeah, we're going to bust that person. And suddenly they go, oh, you've been breaking the law for 7 years. Off to jail with you, or we're fining your business. The point is, they need everyone to be breaking the law at all times, just in case they ever want to bust anyone for anything at any time for any reason.
That's kind of the point in having 12 million regulations.
It's a bureaucracy, and it's there for a reason.
Yeah. Look, I can understand the problem with that completely. The issue is, I do actually quite like having the EU court around just in case I ever need to sue my own government. You don't really get many other options to do that. If the UN court was an actual thing that worked, then yeah, that's fine, don't need it anymore. But as it stands, if the government wrongs me, the only port of call I have, the only thing I can do to defend myself is call them up against the EU Commission. Without the EU there, it hands too much power to the UK government, as far as I'm concerned. So yeah, the regulations are annoying, and totally think something should be done about that. But at the same time, the organisation that they're part of, I quite like being around, because it forces the government to have a bit of accountability for what it's doing to its citizenry.
But isn't the government? That's a word. But isn't the government at least meant to be accountable by the electorate in terms of, if it's not doing what it's supposed to do, you put it out of government. You know, you vote it out. Now, I know that's problematic even for myself as a libertarian. I'm saying that, and I kind of see the problem even as I'm saying it.
Yeah.
But I don't know that the solution is to go, well, we can't seem to solve this problem for ourselves, so we'll go over. We'll have this other government that's over in the EU, and they'll not be like our government. They'll be trustworthy, and I can't see that. At least maybe at the moment, but I can't see that in the end that government being even bigger, even more bloated, even less accountable in terms of an electorate. I don't see that they'd be any more trustworthy or any more just than our own in the end. In fact, it seems to me that it could be quite the opposite.
I can see that argument as well. I do understand. The only thing I've got for that one is, so far in practice, the Human Rights Commission has been quite fair a lot of the time. It's been an okay thing to call people up against. In the long run, yeah, it could go badly, I will admit. The other thing I will say is that the EU, being the size it is, actually reduces its power. I mean, I know it's big and sprawling and stuff like that, but it's also so detached from the average day-to-day life of the citizenry that half the shit it says doesn't actually matter. It's really only there as a government of governments, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with them having some level of control. They need reined in by something. In theory, democratically, yeah, I should be able to vote them out, but yeah, lots of things work in theory.
But ultimately, what are we not? What it seems that you're kind of saying is ultimately, why would we have any need whatsoever to elect our own governments if they are just really there to administrate law that supersedes them and governance that supersedes them from Europe?
Well, that's not all they do. There's a lot of internal laws that the government has complete control over without Europe actually doing anything about. Most of things like the NHS for now, I guess, because TTIP is a whole thing. Incidentally, if they get really into TTIP, then I'm joining the Brexit camp.
Okay.
Because that's mental. It's just... I can't
Do you
think
want
of
to say
anybody
a
that...
little bit about TTIP for any viewers or listeners that don't know what it is?
Yeah, I suppose that's fair.
What's the actual name? It's the Transatlantic Trade.
What does the IP part stand for, actually? Transatlantic Trade...
Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the latest Brussels sellout. FOI requests show Brussels as... That doesn't even make sense. Is concluding secret negotiations.
Oh god, it makes it sound so
USA
Illuminati-ish. It's not a secret. They're televised. They're
to
just
remove
boring.
restraints on US and EU companies. These will be legally binding on the UK, but we are shut out of the negotiations. Block a
So
label.
TTIP, basically, it's the EU getting together with the United States and making laws, trade laws, that
Is
kind
it
of...
making laws? Because this seems to think that they're going to be removing, deregulating.
Yeah, they're not deregulating. If they were deregulating, kind of okay. That's a completely different argument because that's not what they're doing. What TTIP is basically, it's corporatist. It removes the ability for competition and hands a huge amount of power to private corporations that are propped up by the state for some bizarre reason, because public-private partnership always a great idea.
Well, it's the worst of both worlds, but somebody has clearly lobbied hard and spent a lot of money getting this trade agreement on the table.
Yeah.
And it looks as if it might go through.
It's possible that it will go through.
And I think this is why Barack Obama was so keen for Britain to remain in Europe, because they kind of see Britain as their player at the table.
Yeah, it's an inside man. I think he used the phrase inside man at one point.
Yeah.
No, I can understand. From the US's point of view, I totally understand why it'd be beneficial for them to have the UK remain in Europe. But I don't care what the US thinks about that. I also don't care what penguins think about whether we should remain in Europe or not.
Okay, so it's not a factor for you?
Not really. Not what the US considers anyway. Also, TTIP, to be honest, the people lobbying for it have enough money, have enough power, know enough guys to get anybody to pass it, probably. The fact that the EU is resisting it even slightly is kind of good. I have no doubt in my mind that the UK government would immediately just be like, yeah, alright, we'll do that. That's fine for some reason. I don't know. Bribery is a powerful tool.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about people that have managed to lobby governments to keep themselves the top of the competition, not for any valid reason other than just being protected by whatever parent state they're happening to operate in. I don't think TTIP is a unique symptom of the EU. I think it's a symptom of public-private partnership in general.
But the bigger the government, the bigger the potential for those kinds of abuses. If it's a small local government, you can bribe the government and you can get some preferential regulations passed and some monopolies in that geographical area. But now you're talking about the whole economy of the European Union when these corporate policies come through, and that's worse. That's worse.
I do see that, admittedly. I think my issue with that one is that the EU, as it stands, doesn't have that much power in that kind of sphere.
Right.
It's not strong enough, and as you said, 20, 30 years down the line, maybe it could go the other way. It could, get weirdly empire-y for a bit. Oh, that sounded like I meant Star Wars there.
Yeah. Well,
Darth
there's
Sidious
the
for you,
Noam
Commissioner.
Chomsky argument, which I don't really agree with, but I can see the argument where he's like, well, the reason that the Republicans hate the federal government is because a big government can stand up to corporations, whereas, you know, the state government might be too small. I don't think that's actually in practice the case. I think the bigger the government, the bigger the incentive is to bribe the government and take over the government.
But the bigger the bribe has to be.
Yeah, the bigger the bribe has to be. But, you know, the payoff's big enough to justify the bribe. I mean, supposing you're getting 200 million a year, you're talking about getting 200 million a year from the federal government, you can well afford, you know, $1 billion or $2 billion, or because you're going to make that money back in short order. In fact, I think there was some statistic from the Sunlight Foundation that the 500 most politically active corporations made $172 for each dollar they spent lobbying
That wouldn't
over a
surprise me.
period. Now, if you can make that much money from lobbying rather than serving your customers, then the government is your customer. You're not really interested in making better products. Now, I know I'm using the US as an example, but this starts to come into play when we have a government as big as the European Union, where corporations are going to stop serving their customers, and the state is going to become their client.
Well, yeah, that's essentially accurate. I don't see how. I still don't see how that's a symptom uniquely of the EU. That happens with the British government. It happens with local councils. It happens across the board. I mean, yeah,
So
the
what
bigger
you're
the government.
saying is we should abolish government.
It's not what I said. No. My own opinions on this are a totally different thing that I'm willing to do in a different podcast.
Right.
My own sort of socialist libertarian stance, but yeah, that's a whole other discussion
Okay.
for another day.
Well, can I ask, just because I'm going to have to wind my part of this up pretty shortly, but could we maybe have a go at here what we think's going to happen? I mean, despite the Leave campaign's enthusiasm and their kind of upbeat outlook, I'm not so convinced. I think it might go the way of Remain, unfortunately. Unfortunately for me. But even if it does go the way of Leave, call me Nostradamus, but I just think they'll do what they did with
Greece,
with sort of Portugal, Portugal and Ireland, and just say, that wasn't the answer we were looking for. Do it again. You know?
Yeah, I essentially agree with you. To be honest, the way I see it, well, from sort of general history for a start, 90% of referendums go to the status quo. It's very rare for a referendum to vote to actually change anything. Don't know why it's so uncommon. It just is.
What would you do if the question, if you were being asked to join, right? If at this moment in time, instead of it would be Remain or Leave, the question was stay out or join. What would you be inclined to do? Do you think if it was that way? If we were being asked at this stage to actually join the EEC, knowing what we know about it now?
You know, I did just complain about people using this argument, but Norway. Yeah, basically, I'd go for a half in, half out approach. To be honest, it's not horribly different. It's not horribly different from what the UK has at the moment. Because, well, to be honest, like joining the euro, stupid idea. Don't join the euro. Bad plan. I think, to be honest, if there was like a Devo Max option on this vote, if there was a can we lose some of the EU stuff, but still, you know, keep the open borders thing, keep the human rights court.
Isn't that kind of what Cameron tried to do recently?
A bit. Yeah, they're not going to let us, that's not the point.
Yeah, right, okay.
But if it was a question of can we join, that's what I would go for as a possibility.
Right.
It's not an option right now, unfortunately.
Okay.
I suppose we could leave then ask for that, but I'm with you. I kind of see it. If it votes Leave, I see the EU being like, yeah, nah, sorry, I'm not into it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we each maybe make our final statements, and you can have the last words.
Yeah, okay, I'm okay with that.
What's your?
Okay, well, look, I think this, regardless of how boring the debate's been, and how, I don't mean our debate's been fantastic, obviously.
Yeah, but this is by far the best media about Brexit so far.
The general public debate has been pretty lowbrowed. But regardless of that, I think this is an extremely important decision. It's possibly the biggest decision, most important decision we're going to make politically for the next since the last decision to join the common market. And I think it's too important for people not to get involved in. I mean,
I completely agree there.
I mean, it's too late now. If people can't vote already, then they can't vote. But if you are able to vote, I think you should be doing it. And for me, it's got to be out, because I think it's the consistent position with somebody who believes in independence. I value my own personal sovereignty. I value my own personal freedom, and that kind of translates into my national sovereignty. So, and the closer I can bring the government to myself, then the easier it is to get a hold of somebody by the throat and say, this has got to change.
So look them in the eye while you're taking them down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, basically. And I think for me, it's today Brussels, tomorrow Westminster, and eventually Holyrood as well. Let's get people independent from Holyrood and stop Holyrood interfering in people's lives. I don't like the fact that the EU interferes in people's lives. I don't like anybody interfering in my life. I like to do what I do, and I think it's probably good to do as a nation. I think we can do it. I think certainly the UK can go it alone within the EU, where we have massive trading partners all over the world. We would be able to trade with countries that we at the moment cannot trade freely and properly with because of EU regulations. I think we can do better outside than in. I think it's an expensive club that we don't need. And I think also in terms of liberty, I think the EU is a liberal. I think we have quite a unique history when you look at it in Europe in terms of personal freedoms and liberty that we take for granted in this country.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
You don't have to identify yourself to a policeman here. They have to identify themselves to you. That's the opposite way on the continent. And, in terms of trial by jury, being entitled to that, habeas corpus, all sorts of things that we take for granted here that people don't get in continental Europe. The idea that you're innocent until proven guilty. In a lot of European countries, you're practically guilty until you can prove your innocence. And I do not wish for that. Most of our law, or the good stuff that we have, is based on common law, and I think it's unique and pretty decent. And I think we should be trying to enforce the common law that we have, rather than bringing in more legislation and acts and statutes that we don't need. The more laws that a nation has, I think the more inherently corrupt that it is. So for me, it's a matter of liberty, and I think it's better if we get the government closer to us. If you could bring the government right down face to face with you on street level, that's better. So for me, it's definitely out. I don't think it's going to go that way, unfortunately, but that's the way I want it to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think
Which bit?
with most of it,
Okay.
or all of it. I think for me, it's we're paying 19 billion a year to be in this, as you put it, expensive club. That's about 2% of income tax. I'm not for government spending, but I think I would rather our nation spent that money here and figured out how to allocate it on a more local level, if that's what it's going to do, or just gave people a 2% cut in income tax. I think when you've got the government paying to send a leaflet out to everyone's house using our tax money.
Why didn't they just email us, incidentally? Never got that.
It would go in
It was so
everybody's
much
junk
cheaper.
mail. It would go in everybody's...
It went in most people's bin, to be
It
fair.
did. But how are they allowed to do that? Is the government not meant to represent the people? Why are they using our tax money to tell us how we should vote? I think that's corrupt. I think it's corrupt, the EU buying influence with our money, buying up academics, giving them grants so that they'll support the EU, buying up the BBC, the London School of Economics, buying up the unions, all to support the Leave camp, the Remain campaign. They're using money that's appropriated by taxes to basically bribe people into wanting to remain in the EU, and I think that's corrupt, and I don't trust the people allocating other people's money, you know. I don't trust them, and I don't like them bribing people with other people's money to remain part of this. So as Duncan Ballantyne said, I'm out.
A nice Dragon's Den reference. I'm gonna start by saying I've enjoyed the quality of debate here. It's been really good.
Yeah.
As I said before, this is by far the most informative thing about Brexit that's been released. Not a high bar by any means, but still, yeah. I completely agree with Tam. You should get involved. If you're registered to vote, go do it. Just do the thing, because the more people that do it, then the more, in theory, representative it actually is. If like 8 people vote, they're still going to make a decision based on those 8 people, which is a bit worrying. So it takes 20 minutes. Just go do it. For me, the reason I'm behind the Stay campaign, I would like it to be ideological. I really would. I would love to have strong feelings about this one, the way I did about the independence referendum, the way I have done in previous debates. This one purely comes down to convenience for me.
Okay, I think that's what it is for most Remainers.
I think, to be fair, I don't think there's many people on the Remain side that are strongly in favour of the existence of the EU. I think the EU as it stands...
I've seen them on Facebook.
Well, I suppose. The EU as it stands as an institution, it's corrupt. So's our own government, so is Tesco's. Lots of things are corrupt. There's stuff you can do about that. Leaving it's not going to stop it being a thing. It's still going to be there, still going to be corrupt, still going to have a big problem with our economy because it is a major trading partner. I think the existence of the Human Rights Court, so I can hold my government accountable to somebody, is good, at least for now. If this question gets asked again in 10 years, I could well have changed my mind. If it gets asked in 5 years,
you
I could
might
well
not
have changed
get the
my mind.
chance again. No.
Quite possibly I might not, but I might. It's impossible to tell. Chaos theory kind of denies me knowing that far in the future. I think it's unlikely we're going to pick to leave anyway, or we'll even be allowed to. But the open borders thing, the Human Rights Court, some of the labour laws that have been in place, basically there are parts of the EU that do support human liberty, that do exist. Not all of it, and it's a mutable organisation, it does change, but as it stands now, I'd rather it was there than it wasn't, because the choice I'm being forced to make is between a UK involved in the EU, where the UK government is held accountable to somebody, or just having the UK government to deal with. And from my experience of the UK government, from most of the history about the UK government going it alone is not the best thing. It doesn't often behave itself. The way it's been going recently, even less so. We are like the least democratic country in the world. Genuinely, watch how our voting system works. It's insane. I mean, 38% of the vote, 58% of the seats? Great plan. So having things that curtail that power a wee bit, for me, is enough of a reason to stay. I know it's handing extra powers over to a different body that I maybe don't have that much of a reason to trust more, other than it seems to behave slightly better. That's the whole of my argument, is that the EU government isn't as weird as the UK one a lot of the time. That's all of why I'm voting to stay. Well, that and open borders. I like immigration, it's useful. Also, I don't have to pay for visas, which is nice. It saves me money. I mean, it cost me what is it, £2 a year or something to stay in the EU per person? I can't remember the statistic.
A lot more than that. It's several thousand.
Can I offer a solution here? I know you've still got the last word.
One.
Why don't we just make it that if you want to join the EU, you can, and if you don't want to join the as an individual,
that would be awesome.
Right, so you can get your red passport, I could get my blue passport, and when I'm queuing up at the airport in Portugal from a holiday, you can wave it through, and laugh at me as you walk on through. You'll get all the benefits, and you'll also have to pay your subs, your extra taxes. I won't have to pay the extra taxes and the subs, but I won't get any of the benefits, but I won't also be subject to its laws.
So
I'm okay with that. If that was a question, fair enough. You guys leave, I'll stay. That'll be all right. Going to be great if the EU is an individual organisation.
I bet in that circumstance you'd leave though.
Maybe it would be a completely different question. I don't know.
If it's good enough, then you don't have to force anyone to buy it. I guess that's a libertarian principle. But
I mean, my vote at the end of the day, if I want to leave, that shouldn't force you to live with the consequences of my decision. and if you want to remain, that shouldn't force me to live
Yeah.
with the consequences of your decision.
No, I do agree on that front, but it would be nice if that was the question being asked. I would love that. That would be good. It's not, though, really, is it?
No.
We've unfortunately got to decide collectively, so you've got to live with my mistakes and vice versa. It's a shame.
Yeah. And the people at home will decide. Well, thank you very much for watching. If you've been watching on YouTube, or listening if you're on iTunes or SoundCloud, let us know what you think. I really enjoyed this conversation. Please share it on your Facebook wall and annoy people whenever they're debating on Facebook by saying, check out this video, because I think we've actually done something really cool here. Subscribe, because we're going to put out more good stuff, and just thanks to Finn for coming on the show and debating with us.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, cool.
So, be libertarians. Don't be a lefty or a righty.